Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you could be utilizing that time to do something else, so we are appreciative that you're taking that time to spend listening to the podcast with us. As always, if this information is valuable, you feel it to be enlightening and worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and turn on notifications. That way you'll be notified when each episode is released. We do put out a new episode each and every Friday, which is heard on all podcast platforms. And then we put a video out on YouTube every Wednesday as well for those who like to watch the podcast. But in any event, we say welcome. And welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today, I want to get into the topic regarding education in America. And those who listen to the podcast know I talk about education a lot. I am very passionate about education. I just think I know that it's a gateway to not only fulfilling your dreams, but being able to, build a life that allows you to care for and preserve yourself and your family financially. No, I'm not saying it's the silver bullet, but it is a gateway. And so that's what I utilized to, propel myself in my life and be able to take care of my family. So I am passionate about it, and that's why I cover various topics regarding education. With that said, today I want to talk about segregation in public schools, specifically in public schools K through 12. And I want to talk about this today because I read a report and then I saw a news story or something that speaks to this exact topic because over the last decades, 50, 60 decades, since civil rights movement and many of the integration movements that were conducted in the late 50s and late 60s, education in America has become or is becoming once again very segregated. And when I say segregated, I'm talking about amongst the races. There's also some economic segregation, but today I just want to talk about in terms of racial profile. And this obviously is, I guess, from two sides, right? From the first side, obviously, this would be considered a step back, being that so many before us fought so hard to have integration and have equal access to quality education. And then secondly, there's a reason why this is happening. So I kind of want to talk about that today, talk about, segregation, resegregation in public schools, and then I'll close out from there. So I guess in order for me to kind of talk about it, it would behoove everyone, those who know and those who don't know, to kind of give a little foundation of, where education was in terms of racial profile and where we're supposed to be today. So I guess to go back a little bit. So and I'll touch on just a few court cases, Supreme Court cases. I won't go through the whole history of them because obviously there's an audience here and I don't want to bore you guys. But in terms of racial segregation, there was a landmark case that is often referenced in conversations of the civil rights movement, and this case was Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. And in this case, you had the Supreme Court at the time held up a ruling or a law that basically supported what was categorized then as equal but separate accommodations for white and colored races. And they upheld this law because this law was being enforced at the state level. You had Louisiana and also Florida, who, and other states as well, but those are the two that are, I guess, credited with, the establishment and the enforcement of these laws. You had states that had these equal but separate accommodation laws that they utilized initially, forcing railroad companies to provide accommodations for white passengers and also for colored passengers. Now, the key phrase in that is that the accommodations were supposed to be, at least, from the letter of the law, it was supposed to be equal but separate. As many know, and those of you who know this history, you know that accommodations not only were not equal, but in many cases, sometimes accommodations were not provided at all. And, this started with, well, it didn't start, but this was enforced as a result, like I said, of railroad and train cars. But then this bled over into other aspects of the U.S. society, including, where people were allowed to eat, where they were allowed to, congregate in parks and churches and so on and so forth, and obviously in education. And so using that as the backdrop kind of gives you an understanding of what segregation was like. Very 20,000 foot view. I'm not getting into the weeds of it, but just to lay it down that at one time in this country, there were laws specifically requiring that the states and the entire country enforce segregation. Fast forward. You fast forward to 1954. Let me just double check that. I just want to make sure that I'm credible. I'm sure it's 1954. I ain't passed the ball, but I know a little bit. Yes, 1954. So you fast forward to 1954, right? So we go from 1896 to 1954. You have another landmark case that went to the Supreme Court. This was Brown versus the Board of Education. And in this case, you had a man by the name of Oliver Brown who lived in Topeka, Kansas, and he basically was trying to enroll his daughter into a school that was closer to his neighborhood of where he lived, but obviously it was predominantly white because she was being bused to another school that was outside of where they lived, which was predominantly black, and did not support the equal but separate accommodations, right? Because the quality of education in the school itself was not of quality. Anyway, Oliver Brown and I believe Thurgood Marshall was on this case too. I think this is where he got his. This is kind of one of his cases here. But anyway, they take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules that yes, they separate but equal has to be abolished, and so the Plessy versus Ferguson case, in that I guess that stature that they were using in terms of trying to support the argument for separation of the races was done away. It's overturned, and then that catapults the civil rights movement in terms of, the late 50s, late 60s, the marches, and, everyone knows the history. So today, so I give all of that because, again, I want to give some context about segregation. So today, since that landmark decision of Brown versus Board, integration of schools has rapidly not only slowed down, but is going into reverse. I was reading a study here from the Stanford University did a study on this, and in their analysis, and I'm gonna pull this up here on the screen, they said that after analyzing data from U.S. public schools going back to 1967, researchers found that segregation between white and black students has increased since 1988 in the 100 largest districts, and segregation by economic status has increased by 50% since 1991. It says the report also provides new evidence about the forces driving trends in school segregation and showing that expansion of charter schools has played a major role in that, which I'll get into in a second. But so according to their analysis, segregation in terms of races, right, and I just want to keep the conversation focused, has increased since 1988. So, after Brown versus Board is where you start to see, especially in the 60s and the 70s, is where you start to see busing mandates, and you see integration occurring in terms of K through 12 public schools. And then once you start to get to 1988, according to their study, you're starting to see a steady reverse in the other way. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because it is documented, even today, that many times when you start to look into minority communities, when you start to look into lower income communities, quality of education and access to resources is not the same. And many times what you have are you have schools that are now not only inadequate in terms of not having equality in the quality in education, but then you now have a reverse form of segregation because you have so many different schools that primarily serve one type of race of people. I want to play this piece here from this young sister who was on ABC News last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, and she talked about this. She lives in New York, and she goes to a school outside of her district. This is a young black girl, but I just want you to hear what she says. I want you to hear her story, and then I'll go back and close out from there. So let me play this piece from ABC News.
Morning. Ava makes the 14-mile, hour-and-a-half journey through Queens from Far Rockaway to Elmhurst, just to get to her school, MELS, the Metropolitan Expeditionary Learning School.
I have English first period, I have music after, and then I have pre-calc, which is going to be strenuous. And then after my last class, we have speech and debate practice. So we have practice till around 5:15, and I probably won't be home until around like 6:37, depending on how long I have to wait for the bus, the delays. Hopefully anytime before 7 I'll be happy with. And then I have to do homework, shower, eat, go to bed.
What are the schools like around your neighborhood in Far Rockaway compared to the schools around MELS in Elmhurst?
Schools in certain places like Far Rockaway, the resources are minimal. It's just the quality of education, it's different. I do a lot of things that are like inside the school that I couldn't take with me to another place, if that makes sense.
And just want to stop it right there. So, as you heard from this young lady herself, the fact that she has to be bused an hour and a half away from her home, and then an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours back just to get back, really screams and is, greatly concerning regarding segregation and quality of education that is being provided for those who are in neighborhoods where they don't have the ability to travel an hour and a half, or they don't have the, I guess, the financial means or even the support, is what I'm trying to say, to do that. But, just wanted to highlight one more thing. So the Government of Accountability Office also conducted a study. And in that study, they said that the study was conducted to examine discriminatory practices in K through 12 education. In that study, they noted that students who are poor, Black, and Hispanic generally attend schools with fewer resources and worse outcomes. And so, when you hear this story of this sister where she has to travel an hour and a half to school and then 2 hours back, she is one child amongst hundreds who are still left in those neighborhoods that have fewer resources with worse outcomes. And so when you start to see these studies where there is resegregation, or at least a reverse back to segregated schools, it is not just about the racial makeup of the school. It's also about access to quality education and resources. And this is a troubling stat or a troubling study and story, and I want to make sure that we amplify this and get this into the ears of those who you be placing those votes to in this upcoming election, because I've said it 1,000 times. Everybody's focused on what's on TV and not focused on what's actually happening in their communities. And that's where your vote really makes some noise. So make sure that you are tapping into those local elections and those local politicians and those state politicians, those county politicians, to let them know that not only are you concerned, but you are requesting and looking for change in terms of providing quality education for all, regardless of race and residency. But that's all I wanted to talk about today. Like I said, I saw this story pop up, and I said I want to get into this today. I hope I provided you with some information. Of course, I'll post all of this information in the video if you want to click on the links and do the research yourself. But that's my time for today. So as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the people's voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.